Can I get your name and job title, please?
My name is C.S Chiwanza, and I'm a writer and podcaster based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Excellent. Well, you are here to talk about David Wiese. Have I pronounced David Wiese correctly?
Yes, you have. I've been trying to get it right myself for the past few days.
It just looks so much like it should be wise, and someone put a typo in that my brain can't get around that it's not even a W, like that it's something else altogether. I find him a really interesting cricketer because for the longest time, I would say most hardcore cricket fans know who he is and had absolutely no opinion on him at all. Right? Like, unless you are like a Sussex fan or a Titans fan, maybe, maybe briefly some of the other teams he played for, there's no real reason to ever have a strong opinion on him. And then through the World Cup and the weirdness of that, suddenly he does. So how does he end up with Namibia, being that he was a South African cricketer?
Well, firstly, David was his father is Namibian. Is of Namibian origins. If you understand, the closeness of Namibia and South Africa. It was easier for his father, his grandfather to migrate to South Africa for better opportunities and stuff like that, and that's how he ended up being born in South Africa.
And how did he end up in the team?
The Namibian team. Well, after he had given up on his career with cricket South Africa, David he signed a Kolpak contract, and then after a couple of years, he got better, he improved, and then it just happened that the guys he played with at Titans, Albie Morkel and Pierre De Bruyne, they called him up. Look, dude, we have this thing happening here. We have a team that we're building. We need someone with some experience and someone who can help us to form a good team, shepherd some of these guys to become better players. It's a world stage. They had walked a long journey, and now they needed, sort of a talisman, if I may say. And that's how Albie ended up messaging David.
So Albie and Pierre were both from Titans, which is where David played. Is that right? They were all from the, so they all knew each other really well, and then they went off to coach Namibia a couple of years ago.
Yes, yes. And, one of the things that David says is throughout his career at Titans, he was particularly close with Albie. And, Albie, I will tell you, everyone I've spoken to from the Titans area or the Pretoria area, they speak highly of Albie Morkel. He was one great leader. He was so much in touch with the people he led. And David just happened to be one of them. And David sort of looked up to Albie Morkel. He essentially molded his game after Albie Morkel's game. And so that relationship helped everything just come together.
Yeah, I should also point out, for those who don't remember, Albie Morkel was probably one of the most underrated T20 players of all time. And I was still trying to get him to play for St. Lucia in 2018 because just a phenomenal player in T20 cricket. But sadly, I couldn't get him over the line there. Tell me about Wiese. So I know who he is and I know how he plays, but I don't know much about him. One of the things I didn't realize, although obviously anyone who'd watched this World Cup would know, that he's a specimen, is what we would say in Australia, or a unit, depending on which part of the country you're from. He's an absolute tank, but he's also a fitness freak. It's not just a natural thing with him, is it?
No, he's, how can I put it? I will not go as far as say that he's got ADHD or something like that, but he's hyperactive. He's someone with a lot of energy. He's energetic. He has all this energy that's just bubbling inside of him. And the best way he knows how to contain that energy is to work out. He spends time in the gym. He has tried to slow down now as he's growing older, because he needs to look after his body more and stuff like that. But still, talking to him, you get a sense that this is a person, let me say this, when I had a chat with Kitten Jennings, and then soon afterwards, it was David Wiese. I got the same thing from both of them. They are restless people. For them, standing still, just being idle, feels like going backwards. And
Yeah.
they cannot keep still.
No, it's really interesting because he is 36. And at that point in your career, sometimes players get a little bit rounder around the edges and change their physique. And as you said, he has to start looking after his body. I mean, 36 is quite old for I don't know, what would you call him? He's probably a batting all-rounder, but either way, he's a seam bowling all-rounder, isn't he?
Hmm.
That's quite an old age for someone who has done those two skills. But he wasn't always an all-rounder, was he?
No. Well, it's quite funny that he's still bowling at 36. Farhan Bardeen stopped bowling quite earlier
Yep.
because, the problems with fitness. He has to keep his body match fit. And then David is still bowling, is still working on his bowling. And, according to him, he started as a spin bowler.
All the best ones do.
And then,
And then he got big and massive and strong, and he thought, why am I coming in off two steps when I could just wang the ball at people's heads?
exactly. But he was never very, very fast. But,
No.
and then he had to work on his batting. One thing that I think about David is because he was a Titans, Titans was one of the best sides during his time. He had to have a special skill. Being an all rounder was a special skill already. He couldn't just get in as a bowler or as a batter. He had to develop both skills to be of value. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had a career.
He's also, like, when you look at him physically and you think of the sort of player he is, he's sort of like a quintessential South African white ball player, isn't he? Like, that you can. I had a look. I think he played about 4 or 5 one-days, maybe 6 one-days. Obviously, played a little bit more T20 for South Africa. But you look at him and you go, yeah, I can see why you are a good player, but also why they had just a bunch of other people who could do that job. I mean, you've talked about Albie Morkel. You've got so many other players like Pretorius and Morris and all these sorts of guys with. You mentioned the other guy before, the smaller guy who you say gave up bowling.
Beardin.
Yeah, Bahadin. So they've had a bunch of these guys who have either batting seam all rounders or bowling all rounders who can bat a little bit. You can see why, even though it's quite clear he's got a lot of talent, he didn't quite crack it at the South African level, just because they probably have an overabundance of that kind of player. For instance, had he had the exact same skills in Australia, I wonder if he just plays a little bit more, just because they've struggled to fill those spots.
Mm. Yeah, that's quite true, because, things happen in a weird way in cricket, I suppose. Like now, if you look at South Africa, there's a whole influx of openers across the board. You have all these talented openers just coming through. And for David, during his time, there were just so many all-rounders that were making their way through. Behadin, Morris, the guys you mentioned, all of them were
Mm. Yeah, Pefler is probably another one as well. Like there's been a lot of guys in that kind of position, haven't they? Batting probably 5, 6, 7, 8, and bowling. So it's really interesting. Now,
it
how hard is it for
it
him to make
would
the
have been a
decision to go
no-brainer,
Kolpak
I
at
will
that
tell
point?
you, because you are looking at your options. You are looking at yourself. He was 31 when he signed Kolpak, and he's looking at his options. Albie Morkel, one of the
Mm.
best white ball players in South Africa, did not represent SA for long. And that's something that will stick on someone's mind.
Mm.
Here is a player whom you idolize, whom you know is one of the best, but he never got a proper run in the white ball side because the team was settled and there were good players in there. And then here you are, you're trying to develop your game. You are just getting there, and then you have your Morris, you have your Farhan Beadin here. You know, it's very easy to go Kolpak from there.
Yeah, the other interesting thing in your article about this is that he sort of thought, okay, I'll go Kolpak and then I'll pick up a bunch of franchise leagues, which makes sense when you look at him as a player. He's probably more known for white ball. I know he had a very good career for Sussex in first class cricket. I think he averages around just over 30 with the bat and around 30 with the ball. So very solid first class cricketer. But it would have made sense for him to go to T20 cricket, but he actually, when he went Kolpak, he did the opposite of what almost
He
every other
had a
Kolpak player
horrendous
does,
year.
and he just had a really poor year, didn't he?
As he puts it, he had one of the worst years in his career. He was very close to giving up. That's how bad it was.
And so was he thinking that he might be? I'm just having a look at his numbers. So 2017, he made 81 runs in 18 T20 games at a strike rate of 108. If you're wondering what a very bad year is, that is very much the definition. And he averaged 22 with the bat. He bowled okay in first class cricket, but averaged 22 with the bat. Is he thinking, well, I'm over 31, maybe that's it? Or was he just thinking that he had to tweak something and get it right? Because it's a weird age, because you could easily think, maybe that's it. I gave it a go. I went to England. I played for South Africa. It wasn't for me. I'll go and coach at a school or something.
Well,
Or the
I
other
think
thing
for
you
what
think
he
is,
said to me was,
nah, something's wrong here.
because I asked him about his life after cricket, and his response was, if you had asked me this question, I'm for one or two spots in the SA side. For him, when I was talking to him about 4 years ago, I would have told you that after cricket, I'm not getting involved in cricket anymore. After his playing career, he was done. And that will speak to his mindset at the time. He didn't see himself lasting a year or two there. He was already exploring his options. And luckily for him, he has a degree in internal auditing, and I think he was considering going behind a desk and working somewhere.
Do you know what? Of all the cricketers that I would have thought there's a possibility that they would have a degree in internal auditing, I don't think the guy with the Foo Fighters haircut with the incredible block shoulders was at the top of my list. So that's a hell of a fact for you just to drop there. I like that. And then what you really see in that period, sort of after 2017, is he sort of becomes what I would call a sort of, a sort of a B-level T20 player. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but what I mean is you don't see him pop up in some of the more major leagues. What you really see is him sort of floating around the other ones and sort of chipping away. It wasn't like he was instantly trusted as a major T20 player straight away, was he?
No, he wasn't. And his first T20 gig, I think it was in Bangladesh, and he was there as a replacement player. And he didn't play much. He was just that guy. I think they just needed someone, and he popped up on a screen somewhere, and then they picked him up. And, he really had to graft hard to get to the position where he is. And I think sometimes for a person like David Wiese, it's very easy for him to spend time in the nest, just working with no direction, just because you are failing.
And he's got that energy, right? So he's
Yeah.
thinking. So there are probably times when he probably did stuff that harmed him rather than fix things. I want to talk about how he changed his game a little bit. So one thing that I've noticed is that he's a perfect, what I would call like, T20 all-rounder, in that he has a real spot for his bowling. So there's a lot of T20 all-rounders. Most people aren't good enough to play as a batter or as a bowler, right? There's very few players that are. But the really good all-rounders are the ones that at least slot into each section of the game. So for him, it's really death batting and death bowling. His bowling, you said he's not that fast, but he's quite strong. And he hits the pitch quite hard. And he's very clever. And there's something that you talked about in the game, in the piece, where you talked about how, because he thinks as a batter and he was sort of brought up as a batter, he's almost like one step ahead of players when he's bowling. And that is a really handy thing to be at the death.
Yeah, I mean, here's a guy who, to save his career, he worked on his batting. The bowling came afterwards. And funny thing is, as he puts it, it just happened, like one of those moments of epiphany. He's playing golf with Albie Morkel, and then he's looking at Albie swing, and then he's like, wow, But that's how this guy plays his white ball. This is how he bats. And he goes back to work on that. And now, as he's working on that, he learns how to hurt the bowler. He knows how to hurt bowlers the most. And now, as he's working on his bowling himself, he tries to avoid the areas that a proper T20 batsman would hurt you.
So one of the things I noticed, and I was trying to work out if I'd never seen this before because I haven't watched him play enough, or whether it had changed. But reading your article, I realized he's probably changed, and I probably hadn't seen this. But he had one of the most open faces of a bat that I have seen in international cricket in a long time. You're probably, actually, you might be old enough to remember Ijaz Ahmed, who played for Pakistan, who used to hold the bat like an axeman with this incredible open face. It's not something you see that often in T20 cricket or in international cricket these days. And when I was watching Wiese, sometimes there was one time quite early on when he was playing for Namibia where I thought to myself, oh, he must be doing this because he's trying to hit a ball in a certain place. And then it turned out, the more I watched, the more I realized, no, he's setting up this way. So he's almost got a different, and it wasn't just him. JJ Smith, I noticed, had a very similar thing. So obviously that he's sort of molding this kind of, it's almost like a combination of a baseball and a golf swing into modern T20 batting, isn't it?
Yeah, after his epiphany with golf, he went back and then he started watching all these bunch of videos, and I suppose golf did not give him the clear picture, and so a penny dropped for him, and he started watching baseball, and then as he puts it, he had to relearn. And this is a guy who plays a lot of T10, and T10 is all about hammering the bowler, and you know he went back to the very, very, uh, you know, basics of, you give a kid a bat right now, a small child, they would hold it the way Visa holds his bat.
Mm.
Very not technical, not cricket wise. He had to unlearn the technique. And, I think this is where T20 is heading towards, where players uh, rely less on their proper cricketing technique and go to proper baseball or golfing techniques, combine the two, and then you have the best betting setup.
Yeah, I mean, you also, you've seen golfers like Bryson DeChambeau do similar things, haven't you? They've gone off and studied and then come back. It's not a surprise in cricket. I think it was more a surprise that the bat face was so obvious because we've seen players like Josh Butler come with new ways of swinging, and we've seen the sort of Andre Russell extreme power positions, and we have seen those things before, but usually it's still with a fairly conventional bat. It's really interesting, and then I'm assuming for him at his age and the sort of person he is, the sort of person he comes across in your piece, which is, as you say, restless and energy, but also a very sort of a giving person and likes to listen to other people. And it must be a very good career thing for him to be with a team like Namibia because he's now played all around the world, right? And the last couple of years, he's gone from being a fringe South African player to being a very respected T20 player. And the Namibia series, the Namibia performance in the World Cup has probably helped him even more so. But for him, I'm assuming he seems to me like the sort of person who would be an ideal coach. He sort of taught himself how to bat twice, taught himself how to bowl, went through the lows, knows what it's like to represent South Africa, knows what it's like to represent associate teams, knows what it's like to go on the circuit and try and get yourself paid and all those sorts of things. He really does seem like someone who really shouldn't be lost to cricket and should go forward and continue to coach and work with young cricketers.
Yeah, true, because when you make your way through, when you learn the hard way, you just don't know what not to do. You also know how to relate to other people, and I think this is one of the most uh, how can I put it? This is something that people don't look at. When they look at coaches and mentors, and you see a guy like Dhoni, very successful, amazing cricketer, I think great captain, but then I really doubt that he could shepherd other people. you know, because of his career path. I have this thing in my mind where a person who really goes through the lows. I listened to one of your chats with Daniel Gallen when you were speaking about Faf du Plessis, and that's the
Mm.
sense I get from Visa. He knows what it is like to be unwanted.
Yeah, I think someone like Dhoni, if he's going to be a great coach, he's going to be a great coach because he has a supernatural feel for cricket, and he knows how to pull a player into a specific role to make the best out of them. But what he doesn't know what it's like more often than not is what it's like to spend 2 or 3 years where no one wants you
Mm.
and where you have to reform your game and those sorts of things. Which is why I thought someone like Visa was quite interesting, but. It should be pointed out that despite the fact he's 36 and not that far away from 37, and I'm sure he will be representing Namibia in the next World Cup, he did make a joke during your chat with him about Darren Stevens.
Mm, mm,
Uh,
mm.
how I almost think he's too big to continue to play. Like he's too big a unit to continue to play into his 40s. I don't care how fit he is, mate. Eventually, the strain of bowling and batting and being on all those planes and buses is going to come back to him. But do you think now that he's enjoying, this is probably the part of his career he's enjoyed the most? He's going to have the ability to travel around the world, make a lot more money than he has in his career so far, and also probably shepherd the next this generation of Namibian cricketers. You can see why he would push this as far as he can.
Yes, true. Because, as I said earlier, he said that if you had asked him 3 or 4 years ago if he would go back and try to give back to cricket as a coach or something, he would have said no. He had a career, but it wasn't fulfilling. But now it's more fulfilling. He has a better understanding of himself as an individual, and he has also developed the empathetic bits of him. He's now able to relate to other players. He's able to give back to them. You know, so he might not play until he is 40, but he will certainly try as much as possible to give back to cricket. And this is why he is perfect for Namibia. I think you asked that uh, earlier on. This is why he's perfect. Namibia is in its formative years. There's a bunch of
Mm.
talented guys in there, but they need someone to help them go along. And I think if he retires from playing, he's going to try to stay in that system, try to help out whoever is coaching, whether it's Albie and Pierre in the future, whoever it is, he will try to work with them because it's now become so fulfilling for him. It's
Mm.
more than just a job now. It's something that he enjoys.
And I'm going to finish this off by asking about you. Now, you are, if I'm not mistaken, were you not a former poet, or you tried to be a poet? Is that right?
Yeah, I did perform poetry for a few years.
Because here's
Uh,
my question: who goes from poetry, right, to basically chronicling South African cricketers? And by South African cricketers, I almost mean Southern African cricketers at this point, because obviously you've got Zimbabwean roots, and we're talking about a Namibian cricketer on this. But it's quite an interesting thing that you've decided, because David Wiese, when I saw that you written this article, my first thing was I have to read this, because he's just had a great World Cup, and he's such an interesting person. Such an interesting story in that everyone kind of knows his name but doesn't know that much about him. And I thought this would be a really, really good piece, which it was. And there are so many cricketers like Visa who don't have the Namibian bit at the end of their career and they disappear. But you're not just talking to the ones who are trendy. You're talking to all sorts of random cricketers and random coaches and people in South African cricket. So how have you ended up there?
well, well, after my career as a poet, it was a hard career. It was during the Mugabe era. I was one of those guys who would go, yeah, let's go burn down parliament. Power to the people, whatever, whatever, whatever. It wasn't quite good. And then when I moved to South Africa, I'm not one of those who moved out of fear. I just had to make a move. The the cost of living was getting too high. It was getting unbearable. I moved here. I had an entrepreneurship career. And then COVID happened. Just before COVID, the economy happened and my business crumbled. So I'm sitting here having written satire before, mocked the government, having been a poet before, and I'm thinking, I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always been writing stuff. Why not invest this in the sport that I fight with my wife over? I want to watch cricket, she wants to watch whatever. We fight over the remote, and then I lose, obviously. But then, so I decided, you know what? I'm going to make this my vocation.
And are you drawn to the sort of players where perhaps the stories haven't been told? If that's what I feel from like sort of my sort of side, like looking coaches and players that you've talked to. Is it that, or are you trying to work out things and it's easier to talk to the players who are not quite stars? Like, what's sort of driving you to end up with a player like David Wiese and some of the other players that you've talked to?
I think I love telling stories. I always say that. And I think some of the best stories, as you say, are the untold stories. The stars. Everyone wants to tell the story of a star. Everyone wants to tell Rabada's story. And it can be told in a number of ways. But then I believe, these are the untold stories. They are rich. They create you know, this human connection. It's funny how I believe that people get inspired by all sorts of things, all sorts of random things. You get guys who have never. I try to get in touch with guys who didn't quite make it in professional cricket, and somehow a story from someone like that can actually inspire someone to go further.
Mm.
So I
Okay.
just try to get all these guys to be out there.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for your story on the inspiring David Wiese.
Thank you for having me, man.